Well, welcome to the next episode of Discover Lounge. We just wrapped up our discussion about our 4 areas of ministry. We finished up with our topic of our faith-filling school. Then did a little bit of a review at the end, and starting today, we'll use that to segue into our next topic, which is time, talents, and treasures. What it is as a Christian, as a disciple, as one who is learning and growing in the grace and the mercy of God. How do I use my time, my talents, my treasures? We'll just get into the basics a little bit today with our time. We'll get into some foundational pieces that go along with it. So stick right with us. We'll be right back here in today's episode, Opportunity Growth Group of Discover Lounge. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Discover Lounge. I'm glad you're sticking with us here as we talk about this wonderful thing called time, talent, and treasures. So time, talent, and treasures. These are the means, the things, the tools that we have as disciples, as followers of Jesus, to do what God calls us to do. To be able to serve for Him and by Him and with Him. So let's start beginning by a little bit of an overview, shall we? An overview of our 4 areas of ministry as we segue into this wonderful thing called time, talent, and treasures. Okay, so we're wrapping up our ministry, mission and ministry. 4 areas, we talked about these. Meaningful worship, conversational discipleship, outreach and service, and faith-filling school. Now, if you want to do a refresher dip, by all means, stop this video, go back and look at the other previous ones, starting with meaningful worship, discipleship, service. Bottom line, these are the 4 areas that we have determined here at Faith Lutheran Church and School. The 4 fundamental areas in which we serve on behalf of God for the sake of the people around us in our community, in our congregation, and in our school. These are the ways that we say, I'm going to serve you, God, and this is the way I want to serve you. So that leads us then into our discussion today of our time, talent, and treasure. These 3 words are wonderful words. I'll get into that in just a minute. I want to go over these, first of all, these goals. To learn about how we use our time, talent, and treasures as Christians. To focus and give attention to how we live our Christian life. And to discuss practical and faith-based actions we can do. Now, today we will not get to goal number 2 or goal number 3, and I think we'll barely scratch the surface of goal number 1. So, let's get into that. First of all, I want to talk about briefly what time, talent, and treasures are. It's a figure of speech, number 1. Granted, it's a figure of speech used in church circles to describe the mechanical pieces, if you will, of our life with God. So, mechanical pieces. What do I mean by mechanical pieces? Well, God looks at us and He says, I am giving you time for yourself, time for people, time for your family, time for God, time for me, and I want you to use it with responsibility and accountability. I'm also giving you your talents. You are a very unique and special person, God is saying to each and every one of you and to me. You are a unique, wonderfully created person. I created you. I made you. I am giving you certain talents to be able to use for my work, as well as in family and for self and stuff like that. We're going to get into that a little bit as well. And I also gave you something that you have that you give back to me. Now, in the Old Testament, this is fundamentally and foundationally Old Testamental in the context of treasures, using my treasures for the work of God. If we look at back in the Old Testament sacrifices, they gave back to what God first gave them. They gave their best, their first, their foremost. And I'm trying not to get too sidetracked on this one at this moment, but this is going to be necessary to converse over this later. He gave to them everything that they used. Now, they were, back in the day, an agrarian society, meaning they were farmers. They weren't workers. They weren't people who worked in an office. They weren't the people we are today. So how do we equate that back from the Old Testament period to post-New Testament time as Christians? How do we use our treasures? For what priority are we using our treasures? And believe me, there's a massive amount of areas that we could prioritize the use of our treasures. But that's fundamentally where we're going with this segment of Discover Lounge. So, let's go back. So we look at the goal. Again, the goals are to learn about how we use our time, talent, and treasures as Christians. We're going to starting that one. To focus and give attention to how we live as our Christian life. We will get there, as well as to discuss practical and faith-based actions we can do. And, there's one beautiful thing about in this part of Discover Lounge. This is the really practical how-to side of things. All right, let's deal with, first of all, some common misunderstandings. God tells us how to live our lives. Now, we think about that and we go, that sounds true. But then we think about it and that doesn't sound true. Well, we'll hold on to that thing. But right now we're just talking about God tells us how to live our lives. Is that a misunderstanding? And the second point I want to talk about is God tells us on what to spend our time, talents, and treasures. No, I don't think he does. Does he? I don't know. Now, these are some good questions on which to follow up, because the next question is, or doesn't he? All right, I'm kind of leading you in a kind of tricky area, because God does and does not tell us how to live. Okay, wait a minute. It's a both and, not an either or. And you're right, it is a both and, not an either or. Yes, God does tell us how to live, actually. He's got 10 commandments that he uses in order to tell us how to live. He says, "You shall have no other God before me." Underneath that is, "You shall not make for yourself any graven images. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord. You shall not you shall honor the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You shall honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's house." Okay, you know where I'm going. "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. Then you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, manservant, maidservant, ox, donkey, or anything else belongs to your neighbor." Okay. God does tell us how to live. Absolutely. And within that framework of telling us by means of his commands, by means of his words, within that he doesn't tell us how to honor God. By what means do we honor God? By what means do we use God's name in a proper and upright manner? what ways do we honor the Sabbath day by keeping it holy? You see, he does tell us how to live, but he doesn't tell us how to live within the framework of the commandments. See where I'm going with this one? And then that second question, which was right after that, which is, God does and does not tell us on what to spend our time, talent, and treasures. God does tell us how to spend our time, how to spend our talents, and how to spend our treasures. He does tell us that by means of the same commandments that he tells us how to live our lives. He does tell us we spend our time, our talent, and our treasures honoring God. He does tell us that we are to honor God with our time, talent, and treasures by honoring people, and the people and their possessions, and people and their relationships. So he does tell us that. And he does not tell us that. He doesn't tell us that in what manner do we honor him with our treasures. Where do our treasures go? To where do our talents lie? We're honoring God in these areas. And see how this also ties into our 4 areas of ministry, of our meaningful worship, our discipleship, our outreach and service, and our faith-filling school. These are all tie in together. So the usage of our time and our talents and our treasures are great tools that God gives to us. Now, I want to share with you here a little bit on our next slide, and then I'll dive deeper into it, all right? For example, there is freedom in the gospel. That's why it's both does and does not tell us how to live and on what do we spend our time, talent, treasures. Paul writes, I'm pretty sure it's in the first letter to the Corinthians, and I'm sure there's going to be somebody who's going to comment below saying where it is exactly. But Paul is discussing the context of freedom as a Christian. Because Jesus forgave me of all of my sins and gave me a new life, I am free, I am released from the bonds of sin and death. So, yes, I'm free to do anything that I want, but not everything is beneficial. I'm free from the clutches of death and hell and Satan because of what Jesus Christ has done for me. At the same time, I will not be mastered by anything. So freedom, there is freedom in the gospel. The freedom to say, I don't have to, I want to. So let's talk about this a little further in the context of a Lutheran monk back in the day. His name is Martin Luther. And he wrote a book in response to another theologian, a Roman Catholic theologian by the name of Erasmus. Erasmus wrote a book called The Freedom of the Will. God has freed me, so therefore I choose to ... Luther looked at that, read that, and he wrote The Bondage of the Will in response to what Erasmus had written. Now, why would he do that? Well, there's 2 areas in which Luther records our bondage. First, we are bound to ourselves. We are bound to ourselves as human beings. We are bound to our own desires. We're bound to our wishes. We're bound to our wants. We're bound to our own mentality. Yes, in a concept we can say, well, I'm free to choose all of that. But yeah, that's in my own little box. And in that little box, there's no room for God, and the box is really, really, really small. There's really no freedom because it's a bondage to me. I couch it in the way I'm free to choose whatever I want. But it's not really freedom because it's me. It's all about me. To where God says, I freed you from that. I've freed your bondage to sin, to Satan, to their sinful flesh. I've freed you from all those other things that bind you up. You are free. And this is where Paul gets his context. You are free, but I will not be mastered by anything. In other words, I am free to say to my human nature, say to my sin, say to the sin around me, say to all of this gobbledygook that floats around me, including me, I'm free from this. And then I'm not free. Because I trade my freedom for bondage, not to myself, but to my God. The God who is one and only. The one, there's no images of God that I can create that is God. God is the one I give credence and I honor his name. One, I honor his day and I honor the time that I get the chance to spend with my brothers and sisters in Christ. I honor life with my mother and my father. I honor life with the life of other people. I honor life when I respect the marriage bed is for man and woman and no one else. I honor people's properties. I honor people's property by not taking it, but help them keep it. I honor people by the usage of words that doesn't hurt, that lifts up and then tells everything in a kindest way. I honor people by means of not coveting their possessions if they belong to them. And I honor them and people who work with them and live with them. I honor them and tell them, no, you stay where you are. I'm going to help you in your life with God. So I bind myself. I willingly give of myself to God. So what Paul says is true. I will not be mastered by anything. God's not a thing. And I willingly give myself to God in order to live my life. I become a slave to God, and a slave to righteousness, and a slave to grace, and a slave to the love of life that gives me. This is the foundational parts of our life with God. And this is from where we build on our time, talent, and treasures. So we kind of hit the first goal a little bit. We'll probably touch more on it starting next week. We will start touching base upon the actual how-tos and the like that go along with it. Okay. Any comments, any questions, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you in regard to this and any video in this series and any video in any of the playlists that we've got, whether it's random thoughts or whether it's the word, whether it's our worship time. You name it, comment, we'll touch base while there. All right, give us a thumbs up, like our video, please. Let your friends know about these videos in this playlist. Ring the bell to be notified of the next one that's coming out, as well as please subscribe to our channel and let us know that you like what you hear, what we have to say for you. All right, I think that's it. We'll talk more to you later this week. Tomorrow, we've got a Random Thoughts episode coming up. And then on Sunday, we've got another episode of The Word. See you later. Have a great day.